welcome back to the Unstable Fluid podcast, where I'm the unstable and he's the fluid.
I feel like not really. You spent half of our interactions telling me I do fluids wrong.
Yeah, but like if we're gonna pick one or the other, maybe I'm the unstable fluid and you're the podcast is maybe the better way around to do it. But
possibly. How are you doing, Kat?
I'm doing wonderful, thank you, Thomas. Yeah, it's new year, new something, I'm sure. Not necessarily me, but yeah, we're getting on with things. How are you?
Not too bad. Sort of, again, yeah, new year, many coding bugs, but actually some existing coding bugs. Basically, I have vaguely the same coding problems I had last year, but now with a new calendar year.
We love the consistency. It's all good. It's nice to see things like not changing too much.
Yeah, everything's consistently broken. Yeah.
Yeah, but there must be something new and exciting. Like, did new semester for you mean new modules or new study or anything exciting?
It will do, but actually, technically, the new semester at Cardiff hasn't started yet. They're doing that horrible thing of exams after Christmas, which I never had. In school, I did. I had like prelims, or I guess you call them mocks in the rest of the UK. We had those in January, but after leaving high school and going to university, all our exams were before Christmas, so we actually got a break. It's worse. It's horrible for them. Fortunately, I don't have to do any exams, so...
That was going to be my question of, do you have any? How does it feel to have like no exams over the Christmas period at all then? That must be nice.
Actually, the last exam I did was in 2022.
Oh.
Because I didn't have final exams in my master's because my entire final semester was my project. All I had was a Viva, but it doesn't really count as an exam. It was give a 10-15 minute talk about my master's project and answer a couple of questions from people. Like, yeah. As far as the sit down in an exam hall exam, I haven't done one of them since 2022.
Fair. I mean, presumably earlier than that, if online exams, or were they back in person by then?
No, that was in person. My modules were tiny. My entire year was about 40 people by that point. So.
Oh wow.
Integrated master's year, so.
Of course, you're very close to. I think my last exam was similar. Because I did some modules in my second year of PhD. I think that's 2021, maybe? I don't know how long I've been here anymore.
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have got some sort of like talk component stuff as part of the first year of the PhD, but none of it's exams, like it's all coursework, and it's not even, like I don't technically have to pass it per se. It is like, it's engagement is what they say they're looking for.
Yeah, it participate, learn from it. Like at the end of the day, it's beneficial for you, so that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you do miss exam halls, something that people don't necessarily realize, and not all universities do, but I think a good amount of them, as a PhD student, you are able to invigilate. So if you ever horrible. Miss it, and you want to go sit in a hall for a few hours and look at some undergrads cry, that's always an option. Just
minorly traumatize some undergrads by wandering up and down and then pausing next to one of them.
Yeah, maybe that article that came out years ago about invigilators not behaving themselves properly was actually PhD students. Who knows?
Who knows?
But yeah, I have never done it. I have friends that do.
I have an interesting... I don't know, almost anecdote about one of the halls that they use in St Andrews for exams, which is, so it's a hall called Younger Hall, and it was, I don't know, about a century ago, I think, but what it has is it has a sprung dance floor, but they cover the floor over and they use it for exams. But what this means with a sprung dance floor is that as you put weight in the middle of it, it flexes slightly. The idea being that if you're dancing, you're jumping up and down, it's less impactful on your ankles and your knees, and you can dance longer at higher energy, and it's great. It's lovely to dance on. But it does mean that if you're in one of the desks in the middle of the hall, and the invigilator walks past, your desk will just go like that
and tip.
Yeah, I never had an exam in there. I realized I did a visual gag on a thing that can be audio. Thank you for...
Yeah. I got you.
I got that.
No, I think name and shame your. You just forgot our listeners. Unacceptable behavior.
Yeah, they've since gone to. They put all of the. Like, they'll have multiple exams in the hall, so they'll. Like, you have to go down specific lines depending on your module. But when you didn't have to do that and you had like one of the bigger exams in that hall, apparently people could choose their seats. And the people that were members of the Celtic Society, so the Scottish Country Dance Society that I used to run, because they knew about the sprung dance floor, they'd all rush to the edges of the floor so that it didn't tip as much as the invigilators went past.
I mean, that must be such a like psychological trauma to everyone else in the room. If you just see a bunch of people like run to one end of the exam hall, you're like, what am I missing? What is happening? You could do some really interesting like I don't know, psychology on like the sheep mentality of like, if enough people run to that side of the hall, does it get this like conspiracy that it's lucky or something?
I don't know.
Just passed down the generations.
Definitely not my area.
Yeah, you'd have an interest. No. It could be. You have enough people rushing in one direction and you can start using fluids to model population dynamics.
You can. That hall is too small, but you can.
Not if we fit enough people in there.
Yeah, but with the logic of it having exam desks.
You have flow around solid objects.
Yeah, fair. Shall we move on? Because the first thing we were going to talk about today is kind of PhD applications and interviews and that sort of thing, because assuming that all things go well, and this comes out when we intend for it to come out, it's approximately the season of people doing PhD applications and interviews, at least in the UK.
It is indeed.
In other words, where I was this time last year.
Yeah, I mean, I was a few more years ago than that, so I don't have the fear, I think, or like the panic response whenever I think about it anymore. I think more of like, oh yeah.
Oh, good to know that goes away.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. Especially when you start seeing other people come for their interviews, and then you get to be the voice that's like, this is what the vibe of the department is, and this is, it's fine, you'll be fine. And then they go away and come back looking terrified, and you're like, you did great. You did, probably. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, from your personal experience, how does it feel like a year on from your interviews? Do you have any more like insight into how you think they went?
I don't know if I have more insight into how I think they went. I think I maybe have more insight as to why most of them didn't go well enough. But I think most of that insight is based on the fact that the last interview I did, which is the one I did for my CDT at Cardiff, CDT being Centre for Doctoral Training, specific type of PhD. The one I did then, I did at the end of my master's project when I had results, I had done analysis, and I could actually talk about doing the research. Whereas my other ones, I didn't even have data yet. So I had when they went to, can you talk about a research project that you've done or are doing? I had pretty much nothing to talk about because I was about 4 weeks in. I had no data yet.
Yeah, I think that's something that it's definitely important to be aware of in like when in your academic year or academic career you do your interviews. You're going to be saying very different things. Yeah, it's why actually people who leave academia and then come back later will often have a very good breadth of experience to talk about at their interview because they've already completed, say, a dissertation. They maybe have done projects. Whereas, yeah, as you say, if you're interviewing really early in your final academic year, the amount of research experience you might have is very slim. And it's why I think academics, if they know that you're interested in continuing on to do a PhD as an undergraduate, they really strongly encourage doing like summer research projects. That being said, not everyone can do a summer research project, and you're not necessarily putting yourself out if you don't have one. But yeah, as you say, the amount that you have to talk about will vary. It's just how you spin it. But obviously it's a lot easier to spin, I have something, than I don't. Yeah,
exactly. I think the thing that I really didn't appreciate, and to be fair, this may be selection bias of I'm in one department at one university, but I don't know. It also kind of works with my CDT as well, because I've had that cohort as well that I can sort of notice the same thing with, which is that the perception I had in my final year of undergrad at what is a very academic university was that, oh, everyone who wants to do a PhD is going to go and do it right out of undergrad or right out of their integrated masters. And basically, I think what I'm trying to say, I don't think I realized how common it is to go away and come back. Whereas now that I'm in the first year of the PhD, I'm like, oh, right, I'm actually maybe in the minority, or it's at least roughly equal split of people that have come straight from doing an integrated master's or a master's degree, and people who've like gone away into industry or have gone and done something else for a year, even if it's just a gap year.
Yeah, exactly. And there's definitely a fear, I think, that, there's a not stigma. I don't know what word I'm looking for here, but like there's this perception that if you deviate from the academic trajectory, that you're missing out. And it's something that you see at each sort of level of like, why did you take a gap year? Why did you not go to university straight away? Why did you not go straight into a master's? Why did you not go straight into a PhD? And
the one I had actually was in Scotland. Why didn't you do direct entry? So why didn't you skip the first year if you could?
Yeah. It's like you should be chasing that sort of permanent lectureship position as hard as you possibly can, or you're not really invested. And that's a load of rubbish. And luckily people are realizing this, and actually, seeing it from the other side of like who is good at research and not necessarily uniquely, but like there's not that big of a difference you're not missing out. You're going and getting life experience. Every single thing that you do is experience, and you can pull different aspects of your, history to help in academia, and you can flip it the other way as well. Some of the best people I know that like came into the research and were really on top of it, like coming from an undergrad, your time management skills are there's a very broad range of time management skills, I would say. And especially if you test well at undergrad, you can get away with that. And then suddenly you're thrust into a PhD where your time is your own, but there isn't every, 3 months an exam to keep you on track. It's you have to be an adult. And
still working on that, by the way.
No comment. But the people who've come in from industry where they've worked with, say, clients, or they've worked on short-term projects, and they have that sort of, actual experience of seeing things through to completion, they brings this really good experience of time management, organizational skills, efficient meetings. The amount of times people will like organize meetings in a schedule and you're like, this could be an email. Pulling across from industry into academia is actually really, really useful. And I think that they have this advantage in that respect that people who've come straight through don't. The flip side of that then being that the people who've come straight through from academia, say if you've just finished a master's or an undergrad and you're going straight into a PhD, it's all fresh in your memory. Whereas people who've spent some number of years in industry might not remember, their second year analysis module, for example.
Yeah, definitely. But at the same time, that isn't always a bad thing, because what you end up doing in the PhD can be wildly different to what you've just been doing in the final years of your undergrad. Like I spent the last sort of 6 months of my undergrad doing star formation, and I'm now doing galaxy evolution, which is a completely different area of astrophysics that I have had to spend so much time reading up on because it's not a thing I focused on in my undergrad.
That is exactly it. You don't know necessarily what you're going to be doing straight away, especially as part of a training center where you get this training year. The idea being that you have time to catch up. And something that people don't talk about a lot, I think, as well, when you're doing a PhD, yes, you have one main project, and if you're not part of a training center, you might get hired on a specific project. But there is going to be some element of training in that, typically about the 100-hour mark in maybe your first year or the first half of the PhD. So you have time to take extra courses during that period. If there's a gap in your knowledge that you feel like you could benefit from improving, there are resources available in most institutions to help with that. And if there's something not in your university, there are oftentimes groups of universities that will like share lectures at the graduate level. I think the one that Cardiff is part of is called Magic. I
I'm not
can't
sure.
remember what the one I'm part of is. I think that's math specific, but
I know that in Scotland there's the Scottish Universities Physics Alliance, or SUPA.
so no one's expecting you to kind of know everything straight off the bat. It's the entire, like, you can think of a PhD, the entire process as a training thing. Something I'm definitely telling myself at the end of it. It's like, I have learned so much in the last 4 years, and I know I have so much more to learn. But yeah, being faced with something that you don't know isn't always a bad thing. It's just, especially going back to the sort of interview side of things, it's knowing how to frame it.
Yeah.
It's acknowledging that. Don't hide it. Don't lie on your CV because they will find out.
Oh, yeah.
But framing it properly.
Yeah, when it comes to interviews, the interviewers, they've done many of these before. They're I'm trying to put it politely. Their BS detectors are really finely tuned.
Yeah. You get a lot of people applying, so they have to be able to cut it down quite quickly.
Yeah.
And that can work in your favor and against you sometimes. But yeah, like the thing that I find particularly amusing. So my training center, SAMBA, is the Statistical Applied Maths at Bath. And the kind of key thing in that is Statistical Applied Maths, which is kind of a merge of stats, probability, modeling. It kind of brings a load of maths together to have like a real application. But I saw it and I went, oh God.
So physics.
Shut up. I haven't done any stats since my A-levels. So in my undergrad, we had intro to probability that everyone had to do. And then we had to choose between statistics 1 or mechanics 1. Yeah, in my interview, they were like, right, so you want to be part of SAMBA. What's your stats background? We can't find your stats modules on your transcript. I said to a probabilist, oh, does intro to probability count? The answer was no. But it's sort of like, okay, the immediate next question, which hopefully if you're thinking about interviews, you should know what it was, okay, well, what are you going to do about that? How are you going to tackle a stats problem if you've never done any stats? And I think I said something along the lines of like, well, hopefully because it's a CDT, there's a lot of training involved. And the thing that I have got a lot of is fluid dynamics and applied modeling. So if I'm faced with a problem that's like a statistical issue, hopefully I can bring something from the applied side that maybe the statisticians haven't thought of, and try to frame the skills that I do have in a way that's like, okay, I'm not who you're looking for to solve this problem, but maybe I can give you some unique insight that you wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah.
I got the PhD, obviously. I don't know whether that cinched it, but it's just that mentality of like, I think my gut reaction was to just be like, oh, okay, I'll see myself out. Sorry to waste your time. But you have to kind of back yourself aggressively. Don't come off cocky or like, oh, I don't need it. Like, who needs stats? Am I right? Don't do that. They don't like that.
Definitely don't do that.
But you can shift the skills that you do have in this very positive way. And I think that is something that is going to be a really big like indicator of someone who's willing to be a bit uncomfortable and sit in that area of, I don't know as much as other people in this room, but I'm going to try. And I think especially looking at the academic landscape, people willing to acknowledge that they don't know everything are going to be crucial to improving the overall environment.
Oh, definitely. We can probably talk at length about that at some point, but I feel like that's going to send us into a rabbit hole that's going to take far too much time.
Yeah.
Maybe we put that on the list for a future episode. But yeah, no, yeah. I definitely agree with that about being upfront when you don't know something or don't have a skill that they're talking about them expecting you to have, because ultimately, yeah, one of the questions I got asked in one of my interviews, it was actually my interview at the University of Oxford, which was my first real train wreck of all the interviews. Cambridge had gone okay, but that one was the train wreck. But one of the first questions that they asked me was, right, your degree is in astrophysics. What has that not included that somebody who's done a physics degree would have done?
Okay.
I'm like, how do you, like, do they just want a list? I'm like, it's a really odd question to ask. But I think the way that I should have answered it was, well, I didn't do this thing on laser optics, but I did do XYZ things that would at least let me answer questions on that sort of thing, because realistically, what they're looking for is people to be able to work from first principles. You understand the basic physics of what's going on and can work from there.
Yeah.
Problem is, I said, well, they didn't teach me laser optics, but I don't think I said don't think I said laser. I think I just said, well, I didn't do much optics. To which the observational astronomer that I was talking to said, they didn't teach you optics. I'm like, I wasn't finished, but then I panicked.
Yeah. It's a lot of times it's not even trying to catch people out. I think at undergrad, maybe interviews are slightly different, but at PhD level, it's like we are just trying to find the best fit for this role. So the questions hopefully aren't coming from a bad place. So it is that sort of like, tell us your gaps in the knowledge, and we'll go from there. But yeah, the nerves taking over, really, really bad.
The nerves thing, especially when you're somebody who's not really had to do interviews before, because I had no interviews in my undergrad. And then there is, particularly with that one at Oxford, it is that sort of thing of universities have reputations. And there can already be that feeling with places like that I don't belong here, or I maybe don't belong here. And as soon as something, something that would trigger a sort of nervous response, can be a bit of a,
definitely,
bit of a interesting thing to deal with.
Yeah, and it is a big thing, and something I found interesting. So the interviews where I didn't feel went quite so well, and the offers I didn't get given, were all big interview days. So they were they have like one day where everyone comes in. Whereas the interviews that went really well for me were ones where it was small groups or just one-on-one conversations. So seeing other people interviewing, I think, had a big factor in how stressed I was, because suddenly I'm talking to these people that I'm competing against in some way, and the imposter syndrome kicks in, and it's very like, oh God, what? I'm not as clever as these people, and these people are chatting, and everyone's just like nerding out about maths, because that's what mathematicians do. And suddenly they're like, oh, I didn't know that, and that put me in a bad way, I think, before an interview. Whereas, smaller groups, or the situations where I got a chance to talk to the PhD students, the Samba interview, we had cake. All the PhD students had cake beforehand, and it was just a social situation for the PhDs, and that was really nice, and that like calmed me down in a way. Whereas everyone in their suits getting ready for Oxford interviews, and everyone's like, oh, did you revise this? Do you know this? Oh God, they asked this in this interview. It's like going into an exam. Everyone has their own kind of way of prepping for it.
Actually, now that you say that, it was the same. I hadn't noticed that before, but the ones that I really didn't do as well at were the ones that were big interview days. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I'd noticed that before, but
I think it makes a difference. I think.
Yeah, like the one that I got was the chillest interview, because it was like quarter of an hour on Zoom. It was my last one. Like there was no, I don't know, hyping up before it.
Yeah. And like there are going to be people that really enjoy those big environments where you get to just like nerd out with loads of people, and I think there are aspects of that's really nice, because there have been people that I met on interview days where neither of us got that position, but I've seen them at conferences later on, and like that's really cute. You get to network really early on, but it's knowing what works for you, and kind of adapting your expectation going into it match.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely right. But I feel like we've spent quite a lot of time talking about interviews at this point.
Yeah.
I guess maybe if you could sum up the one key bit of advice for somebody that's sort of maybe being faced with a barrage of PhD interviews, or maybe even just one interview, what would be the big thing you would say to them?
The main thing I think that is important is that you're interviewing them as well. And I know that is potentially, they might have been told this already, but I think it is something that is so important to remember, is like, if you go into an interview and you learn in that interview that the position isn't exactly what you thought it was, or you don't click with the supervisor in the way that you thought you would, or I actually had this, I went into an interview and I was like, I'm applying for this topic, and they were like, oh, we're not hiring for that topic, we're actually doing this topic. I didn't want that. I don't want to spend 4 years of my life doing that. So I was like, thank you for your time. I finished the interview, and then I was like, don't give me an offer. It's so important because at the end of the day, you're the one doing it for 4 years of your life, potentially more, potentially less, but like it's significant portion of your life you're spending on it. So yes, it's okay to have nerves and, you know, all of the normal interview stuff, but at the end of the day, it's your choice. And if it's not something that you want, then it's okay to get to that point and pull out.
Yeah, definitely.
What about you? What's your one key bit of advice?
I think my main bit of advice would be broadly similar, which is that you're not just interviewing them. You're kind of interviewing the whole prospective PhD as a whole. So it's not just the project. It's also the group, it's the supervisor, it's the university and the department and the place that it's in. Like the thing that I insisted on doing with everywhere I had applied was I wanted to attend the interviews in person because I didn't want to move somewhere for 4 years that I'd never seen before, because the vibe of a place can be really important. So I think that's something to think about as well, is you've got to consider the whole package of the PhD. And generally speaking, I'd say don't worry about being too picky about prestige. I think prestige is overrated.
Yeah, no, definitely. You raised such a good point. Like, not only are you doing that project, but you're living there. That's your experience. That's your, you know, those are your colleagues. That's going to be your network. That's going to be, you know, you have to pay rent in this place potentially. Yeah, it's so important. And yeah, very, very astute, Thomas.
We've talked about interviews. Let's actually roll back in the process a little bit. We're just in completely the wrong order. And talk about the actual application stage. So I'm actually going to go completely off piste from what we have in our little plan for this and say, how did you find places to apply to? How did you find projects, potential projects at universities?
So I believe the first thing I did was went up to a lecturer that I really liked and went, I want to do a PhD. I like this topic in particular. Are you doing anything? And that led to a conversation of, some of them said, yes, here's a project internal to the university I was already at. And some of them said, no, here are some other people that I think you should look at. That was a really good sort of first point. But obviously that was very in like one network. That was a lot of places at Cardiff. And then people that worked with the people at Cardiff. The next thing I did was talk to other PhD students who I'd, like my tutors and people I knew in the department, and was like, what do I do? I think Google how to apply for a PhD. And that then led me to findaphd.com, which is a website that has a load of PhDs in a load of different subjects on it, and universities kind of post, it's kind of like a job search site, but for PhDs. And then it was a case of, if I couldn't find something I liked on that, so I found a few things I was kind of interested in, I went through a load of university websites and Googled on, or searched on each university page, research here, postgrad here, any PhDs on offer. That was a nightmare.
Yep.
And I strongly don't recommend doing it, because for maths at least, I believe there are 73 universities offering PhDs across the UK, and they all have varying website designs.
And they're almost all terrible.
You said it, not me.
Oh, I do not care if anyone judges me for this. University websites are awful. Almost all of them. And actually, the more unforgivable thing about university websites is that they will do a redesign and make it worse. But anyway, I digress. I went through a very similar process to you. My first port of call was the guy that I'd done my summer project with and was going to be doing my master's project with. And I was like, I'm interested in this stuff. Any chance you'd be offering any PhD project in this area? And that did lead to an application for a project. I spoke to somebody else and then sort of worked out that their research area wasn't quite for me. But yeah, that's sort of my initial port of call. I did not find findaphd.com or whatever the hell it is. Yeah, I did not find findaphd.com. I did find jobs.ac.uk, which does have some PhD stuff on it. A lot of it is more seniors or postdocs and lectureships and such. Yeah. But there are some PhD things on it. But even once I think I did then later find findaphd.com. But what I also found was that a lot of PhDs are not advertised on there.
Yep.
Which was a pain as well. And then I kind of fell down the same rabbit hole of, I'm going to look up different universities. Problem is that as much as you can find lists of physics departments, it is way harder to find lists of astronomy departments or astronomy groups within physics departments. So I don't know. The way I found a lot of things, I was going to sort of look at universities and see if they had stuff, was I went through the papers that I was looking at for my master's project pre-review. Like that's in the UK, that's in the UK, that's in the UK, and went down all of them.
Okay.
Not the best way to do it. I found out there was groups like Southampton and stuff that did not collaborate with the other groups I'd found. Southampton and a few other places that would have had groups that may have been interesting, and I got to them too late. But yeah, it's a bit of a nightmare trying to find these PhD places. Every university's website is different and every application system is different. Some of them are okay, some of them are awful, not looking at anyone in particular. Edinburgh. They ignored my application and they made me go through all these stupid hoops.
That's sad. That is sad.
Yes, I'm still salty.
I mean, yeah, one of the CDTs I was really excited about didn't get refunded, and I still sulk at the university for it. I'm glad I'm happy with where I am. I'm very fortunate that I really enjoyed my PhD, but yeah, still just memes from interviews. Yeah, I will play devil's advocate for the universities and say that the expectation is on the person, like maybe the grant holder, to do that and put out the PhD thing application and advertise it, and on top of standard workloads of admin that researchers have to do anyway, there isn't one organized like central department admin person that does that necessarily. I
agree with that, but it doesn't excuse the universities that do big interview days.
No.
Because they should be advertising it, and a lot of them weren't.
Yes.
Yeah. You had to go to their department's website on their university website and then find the bit.
Yeah.
And as we've established, it is hard to find things on university websites.
Yeah. Something that I always wondered about, and maybe it's the like cynic in me, but I'm like, is that a pre-filtering? Like for universities that typically get a lot of applications, say, I wonder sometimes whether or not how hidden the application is. Is it like some big conspiracy to get rid of people who are like mildly interested? You only have the people that have the time and energy to do that. And there's a whole stack of reasons why that's a terrible filtering system.
I'd like to think that it's not pre-filtering.
We can hope. But luckily, there are people in the world that are willing to do something about it. Don't know why I went to news presenter voice.
I don't know.
Can I segue to this?
Yeah, go on.
So I hated the interview process so much, and it wound me up so much that I said no more. I put my foot down, I had a little tantrum, and I was like, right, maths PhDs in the UK.
Had your Gandalf moments.
Everyone shall pass. Accessibility should never be the limiting factor to someone wanting to do a PhD. Like, I think everyone should have all of the information as easy as possible, and just because some unis can pay for really nice websites and really beautiful designs, and they have, marketing teams for it, and then other universities it's just one guy who's really passionate about getting everyone in, but they don't have time or money to do so, that should not be the limiting factor. So I got together with another PhD student in maths, and we made an event called PhD Your Way. The idea being that it's your route into a PhD. So we took the job fair model of let's bring all of the jobs to one place, and we did that for PhDs. So I have successfully, for the last 2 years, I'm going to use the word bullied because I believe I have over 20 universities across the UK to take part in this day and give me all their information about how to apply for their maths PhDs and get PhDs from the departments to come and talk about what it's like there, and bring them all into one day so that applicants can have all the information side by side. So, you have the information about like how many people are in an office in Strathclyde versus University of East Anglia, and it's side by side in the same format, so you're not like scrummaging around different websites to find it. And I'm just shocked that it didn't already exist.
I have a hypothesis as to why it didn't already exist.
Because it was a nightmare.
Which is the sheer amount of work you put into it. Unpaid, I might add.
Yeah. Speaking of, if anyone's listening that wants to sponsor PhD Your Way, any companies or universities that want to give us money for next year, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. You can also sponsor the podcast. I don't know if we're doing that, but we are now.
I mean, if you want to give us money, I'm not exactly going to say... Okay, I might say no depending on who you are, but...
Yeah, we have standards. Low standards, but standards. So this is the event that we've kicked off, and unfortunately it does only for the minute exist in maths. If it becomes a bigger thing, which it has potential to, we could see something similar for everything else. But yeah, I personally spent, I think, 16 hours going through every single university website in the UK, checking whether or not they did maths undergrad, checking whether or not they did maths PhDs, and finding a contact to email the university being like, hello, give me all your information, please. It took me 16 hours of just sat on my laptop doing that. And if every single PhD applicant is doing that, that's ridiculous. That should not be the way it is.
Quite frankly, the ridiculous amount of duplication of effort.
Yes. Yeah. So let me do it for you. But specifically only for maths, unfortunately. I will continue to re-emphasize that.
It would be nice if more things like that could exist, but it requires people who have the time and willingness and ability to do that.
Yeah. I mean, watch this space. Who knows? Maybe we go corporate and global and, I don't know, throw a few more buzzwords in there, but have people to do it. But hopefully, at the very least, it shows a willingness for academics, because everyone I've spoken to is like, that's amazing, we should do that. And it's like, yeah. So, but if you're applying in the next 1 to 2 years, I would say, unless you want to do a maths PhD, I can't help.
It's always worth looking out for things vaguely like it, though.
Yes.
Things that are at least talking about even just how to find it, which is one of the hardest things. Like I said, I missed out on applying to certain departments because I didn't know they had Astro groups because it was badly publicized.
Yeah. And I think networks are going to be the main thing that help in that. So depending on sort of any groups that you're in, there are lots of people that, like, I'm not an isolated person. I'm not like, I'm the only one that cares about it. There are so many people that care about it. So there are loads of different initiatives. Again, math specific, because that's my background, but I could name Piscopia as one, is a initiative trying to get women and non-binary people in maths undergrad through to PhD. And they post information, they help with adverts, and it supports a network. And I think there are these small isolated groups of, like, if you are part of, if whatever your sort of subject, like, reach out, Google, see if there are, like, those sorts of networks for you. And that can be a really nice way, because at the very least, if there's not, here's a big list of all the PhD opportunities, there might be a few PhD students that know other people.
I feel like we've talked at fairly long length about the whole PhD application interview stuff. Shall we do the middle word in the podcast name and actually talk about fluids for once?
Oh, scary. Yeah, go on.
Okay.
No, pretend that that's not literally our jobs, but, like, yeah, let's do it. What do you want to know? What do you want to talk about? What's the problem?
Right. My suggestion, and this is going to probably also encompass our problem of the week section of the, or problem of the month section of the podcast as well. Problem of the podcast. There's so many problems of the podcast.
No, there are so many problems with the podcast, not of the podcast.
Or in the podcast? Are we problems?
My therapist has advised me not to answer that question.
Fair point. Okay. This is going to encompass the problem of the month, problem of the podcast section as well. So let's talk about fluids, and specifically, what I would call ram pressure, but you would call drag, I think we've established.
Yeah. or at the very least, I don't think I would give it its own name. I don't care enough about it to justify naming it. Okay. So let's start with what is it? And then we'll talk about why you care and why I don't.
Okay, so drag or ram pressure, essentially it's the force that some object feels because of the flow of a fluid hitting it, essentially. So examples would be the force something feels as it flies through the atmosphere or falls through the atmosphere, or the force that you feel when you... the force that you feel if you dive into a swimming pool, the force from the water that slows you down, or the force that you feel when, like when you're washing your hands, the force of the water on your hands. So that is all essentially the same force. It is a flow of a fluid, either air or water in the examples that I used there, that exerts a force on some object. Now I could go into the physical examples of what actually a force is, which is just a change of momentum. It is it's the thing hitting the object and then changing direction. Its momentum being changed, so you feel a force. But that may be too much detail for what we really need to discuss at the minute.
I think that pretty much covers it. And actually, I was struggling a little bit because you mentioned when we were planning the podcast, you were like, oh, let's talk about ram pressure. And I'm like, I've never heard that word before. And is it one of those things that like our physicists and engineers and mathematicians all care about slightly different things in the system, or is it like we just call things differently? Great example of that is like linear regression. If you go off on that tangent, like different people do it differently and call it different things, but you're all speaking different languages but talking about the same thing. And I think the main one, like personally with my fluids experience, is that more often than not I don't actually care about the solid bodies. So it's kind of twofold. When I look at flow going past something or flow acting on something, typically I'll shift frame of reference so that the thing, if you have flow, like a ball falling, say, falling through the air, and I'm stood watching it do that, I can see that the ball is moving and the air is kind of like being pushed out of the way and then moving around it. If I was going to model that using fluid dynamics, I would fix the ball in space, and I would have the air rushing past it faster because it relative. So we look at things moving past solid objects. More often than not, with the fluid dynamics that I have done, so the modules that I've taken and the way that I've studied it, I care more about the flow than I do about the trajectory of the ball, which is why we shift that frame of reference. At which point the ram pressure is like, it's there, but I don't really care. We're looking more at the nuances around the behavior of the fluid. And then the other factor is like, so the stuff that I do in my PhD, I'm looking at droplets that are 0.2 of a millimeter in radius. They are tiny, tiny little things that are falling. And force and pressure is kind of proportional to area. Or, inversely proportional. No, proportional.
Force is proportional to area.
Yeah. So these tiny things are falling. The drag on that is not big. If it was, rain wouldn't fall. It would just kind of hover in this really ominous, like we'd be underneath a swimming pool kind of way. So every time that, I start writing out my equations of like, right, what forces are in my system, I throw out drag so quickly that I've never even looked at it. And I'm at the point where I kind of throw out gravity as well. Like if my droplet's already moving, the effect of gravity in that small frame isn't going to do much. And I think that's kind of why I don't really think about it a lot.
I get what you mean, and I think maybe the reason that ram pressure is such a thing that I've been taught about and think about is because I'm dealing with much larger physical systems. Whereas you're dealing with things on the order of millimeters. I'm thinking about stuff that's on the order of kiloparsecs or megaparsecs, which are millions and millions and millions and millions of kilometers. So I think that's maybe part of it. Also, the fact that mentioned physicists and engineers, we both talk about ram pressure, is that engineers are dealing with macroscopic things, say planes or Formula One cars, that have to deal with air resistance, and then this, you'd call it drag or ram pressure, it's essentially the same thing. are both important factors in those systems as well.
I mean, that's not to say that like pressure isn't important to mathematical fluid dynamicists at all. So much of what I do is actually pressure based. But yeah, it's if you're looking at sort of why you would care. Presumably you mentioned Formula One, like the engineer would be like stress testing how much force can be exerted on the car before it breaks.
And also how much force would be required from like air passing over the wings of the Formula One car to stick it to the ground. Downforce is essentially a consequence of this.
Yeah, whereas the sort of like preliminarily mathematical stuff that I'm considering is like we throw out so much, we care about the broad scope of it rather than the nuance of like, if we add 10 kilos to this car, it's going to explode. But it's nice seeing like that broad scale from the abstract versus like, right, exactly to the, you know, I don't know any units of pressure, kilogram per meter squared, Pascals. Like, to the Pascal. How much force this thing can take before it explodes. It's a nice, like, you need all of the things to build up on each other.
You mentioned something maybe a minute or so ago about actually saying you don't care about the solid objects. So my specific thing with ram pressure, with what I do in my PhD, which is looking at galaxies and how they evolve, is that I have like a central galaxy surrounded by a load of gas, which we call the circumgalactic medium, which is specifically what I study. But I have a satellite galaxy, a smaller galaxy, orbiting my main galaxy and passing through that circumgalactic medium. So what I have is a galaxy that has gas in it, so a fluid passing through the gas that is the circumgalactic medium, so a different fluid. So I have two fluids, one fluid body held together by gravity passing through another fluid body.
Right.
So I have a fluid-fluid reaction, and essentially you can do exactly the same thing you mentioned with the ball, of fix that galaxy in place, go into its reference frame, and you see the gas of the circumgalactic medium flowing sort of round it, past it, in some cases through it, and it gets a headwind from that circumgalactic medium gas. Okay. And what I'm specifically studying at the minute is how the pressure, the headwind pressure, the ram pressure from that circumgalactic medium gas, how that affects the gas in the galaxy. And the main reaction you get there is that the gas from the circumgalactic medium actually removes the gas from the galaxy. It's called ram pressure stripping. You strip the gas away from the galaxy.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to ask, like, if you've got two fluids, like, presumably there's some, like, mixing or turbulence going on there. So is it instead this sort of, like, outer shell?
You do get some.
Healing, almost.
Kinda. So, yeah. I'm still working out exactly the physics that goes on the micro scale, and doing a lot of reading around that. But that is essentially what happens. You get some mixing. And as far as I know, some of that circumgalactic medium gas will get brought into the galaxy, but there's other stuff that will get stripped away as well. Because a galaxy isn't like a point object. You've got this expansive thing. And maybe the stuff that hits the middle of the galaxy has to go through the densest regions. Maybe some of it will get held onto, but the outer layers will get stripped away because they're held on less strongly because they're further from the bulk of the mass.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's terrifying.
But that's currently what I need to look into, is exactly how the stuff is stripped. That's my job for next week.
Very cool. You managed to sneak some actual PhD in there as well.
Yeah. It happens occasionally. But this is the thing, is like the same fundamental fluid phenomenon of this ram pressure or a drag force does everything from keep Formula One cars on the ground, to put planes in the sky, to remove gas from galaxies weighing thousands of millions of times the mass of the sun.
Yeah.
It's all the same phenomenon, just on vastly different scales.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's an entire subset of looking at sets of equations that non-dimensionalization, like remove your length scale, remove your time scale, and then suddenly you have one equation that can be applied at, all sorts of scales. I mean, you mentioned drag lift, and then you said about planes, so you now have to. Thomas, how do planes fly?
Okay, how do planes fly? Right. Okay, so essentially, I have to explain how an aerofoil works without being able to mime. Yep. Right, okay. Right, so planes have wings. This much we know. But a wing isn't just like a plank of wood. It's not flat. A wing is three-dimensional. It has some amount of shape. And essentially, what it has is two curved surfaces, a top surface and a bottom surface. So the top surface will be concave? Convex? Concave? Convex?
I don't know. One of those.
Convex. Concave is the one that bends in.
Concave is a cave. It bends inwards. Convex is vexingly outwards. I don't know. Sure, there's a rhyme there.
Yeah. So a wing has a shape. So the top layer will be a concave curve. So it has a curve that starts at one point, goes to a maximum point, and goes to a lower point at the end. That's the rough shape of the top of a wing. The bottom of the wing, it has this sort of upside down sine wave shape where you've got a convex part and then a concave part. And what you get with this shape is that the top side of the wing, air will flow over it and it will go over that at a higher velocity, a higher speed, and therefore a lower pressure than the air going underneath the wing. Underneath the wing, it will move slower, it will have a higher pressure, and this creates some unequal pressure between the bottom of the wing and the top of the wing. And what fluids want to do is equalize pressure. So this generates a lifting force. The high pressure under the wing lifts the wing and therefore lifts the aircraft into where the low pressure is, and that's how planes take off. And this lifting force requires a sufficient amount of low pressure above, high pressure below, which you only get by going fast, which is why we use jet engines.
Beautiful. Do you know the name? Yeah.
Did that make sense?
I mean, I followed along.
I'm not an engineer.
Don't need to be an engineer. I would have described the aerofoil as like it's two curves, like the lower half of a crescent moon pointing downwards and then a ball at the front, to get that sort of like curved shape at the front. And then the concave and convex opposite sides, but they both curve in the same direction and then taper off to a point.
If you want a really good explanation with like video graphics, go watch the real engineering videos on the 787.
There we go.
I was watching those recently. That's the only reason I could explain
this.
I
thought you were going to say we're going to make one, and I'm like, bloody hell, okay. So it is this kind of key principle. Do you know what it's called?
You told me earlier. I think it's Bernoulli's principle, right?
This guy Bernoulli is he did a lot of stuff. He did so much stuff in fluid dynamics. He's just absolute chaos. But the main Bernoulli principle is this sort of region of low pressure, high pressure correlating with high speed, low speed. And there are some really cool, he did an experiment on it by having this like tube that was thicker at both ends and thinner in the middle, and then you could measure the velocity in those regions because the thinner tube has higher pressure, and the outer tube, the fatter tube, has lower pressure. If you think about trying to squish a balloon, for example, you're increasing the pressure in that area by decreasing the area. Volume, thank you. And it's the same sort of thing with fluid dynamics, and everything wants to leave a high pressure environment. So, but it's really cool. I remember when I did I think I was in second year of undergrad when we did aerofoil, and we learned that this is what gives the lifting force. And it's just one of those, like, I think it's such a nice introduction to fluid dynamics because you're like, that's so cool. Yeah. And oftentimes when you meet people in the street and you say you do fluid dynamics, as you do, they ask how do planes fly. So it's a good one to have in your back pocket as like, it's just Bernoulli's principle, isn't it?
Yeah, like I've managed to do the basic introduction to fluid mechanics at the end of episode 3.
Yeah. Gosh.
This is all in the wrong order. It's fine.
We'll end off with, hi, I'm Kat. I do a PhD in fluid dynamics.
Cut. No. Good discussion on a couple of different things there. I think we've covered a decent amount of things. Obviously, if you have further questions on any of the things we've discussed along the lines of personal experiences of PhD applications, interviews, we're not going to look over everyone's personal statement. Please do not send us them. I
was going to say when you started talking, I'm like, no. That being said, we're more than willing to have chats in a broader sense.
Yeah.
about things. Specifically, the best way to get us to actually respond to things is suggest topics for us to talk about in our podcast, because this is time that we have to talk about this sort of stuff.
Exactly. And we should hopefully be doing this more regularly.
He says cursing us.
Oh, yeah, undoubtedly. But yeah.
Listen, the podcast comes out when the podcast comes out, okay?
Yeah, exactly. The easiest way to actually contact us if you want to ask any questions, give feedback, suggest topics for future episodes of the podcast is either contact us on social media. So Instagram, we are at Unstable Fluid Podcast, and on Twitter, well, it's not Twitter anymore, on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, we are at Unstable Fluid. And if you want to email us, that is unstablefluidpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for coming with us on this chaotic journey through episode 3, and we will see you in episode 4 when that eventually comes out.
Yep. All of the things. Look after yourselves. See you next time. Or hear you next time. Wait, we won't.
We won't hear them.
I'll hear you, though. So I stand by what I said.
I could just turn the mic off.